Okay, I think we're G to G, folks. Let's do this. This is playing on my phone too. All right, we'll chat that. We'll turn that off. Hey everybody, welcome to Get Writ Live, the second episode of Fall 2022. I am your host, and will always be your host, at least for this whole year. Dr. Rich Scheibner, hanging out here in the writing department. I am an assistant professor. So glad to be with you all. Now, last week was very interesting, right? It was a day when we had a couple hiccups, things like that, getting all things ready for the stream, as is expected when you're working on something new. You're coming back to it after a number of years, months, we can kind of say. But nevertheless, I think we're all taken care of now. We got like a new fall theme. What do you think? Lots of mountains and things like that. It's really pretty much fall weather at this point. We got all kinds of rain coming in. I have the skylight right above me. I love it. I can see all that sort of stuff. And yeah, what we're going to do today is talk about writing for publication. And that can mean so many different things. So let's go ahead and get into it. Got a couple things to tell you about before we get into our main topic. All right, so we'll do the switcheroo here. Little scene change. Okay. So we're going to talk with a special guest, Matt Basemi, in just a little bit. But before we begin any of that, I want to talk about a few items that I always discuss, which is now tradition here on the show and on the stream. I'd like to once again thank Writing Center Director John Suffren and the Writing Department for supporting another term of Get Writ Live, and really a whole season, we could say, because this will run through April for the most part. And if you'd like to see any of our past streams, you can find them in two places. There's a link in the description below, and there's also a link to the Writing Center page where you can find all kinds of different stuff on there. So if you go to our YouTube page, which we have right over here, I think it's actually streaming right now, so we'll kind of keep it low, but you can see everything that ran recently with fall writing goals that we did last week with Dr. C or Dr. Beth Caravella, which is awesome. We have sort of special posts we put in here every once in a while. For example, the PWSA, the Professional Writing Student Association, talked about its fourth annual undergraduate symposium. And so occasionally we'll post those. We'll also do the live stream on Wednesdays and then other sort of special posts as we go. And I'm excited to see what comes out in winter because some students with 4001 will also be contributing content. And it's better than me just blabbing on. Like, I love talking on here. It's super fun to talk about writing issues because that's what I do for my day job. But to get in student voices, whether through interviews that we do here on the stream or through special posts that we see here, it's awesome. So if you have ideas and things that you want to see here on Why You Writ Live as part of this series, feel free to let me know. And if you ever want to participate as a special guest here on the stream, let me know too. I am happy to have you on. I always love the company, and I'm doing that even more than I did last year because I think getting those sort of polyvocal streams and stuff, it's very interesting. It feels more like a podcast. It feels more like a talk show, and we've got a lot of great people here in the department who warrant more attention and should get the spotlight. So we have that. And then, like I said, all the links are also here. You can check out direct ones to them, so feel free to look at those at any time. Couple things we have coming up, which I like to talk about at the top of the stream and at the end of the stream. Today, as I said, writing for publication, and next week we'll be talking about writing under pressure. So what's it like to write under timed conditions? What's at stake for us when that happens? Writing as podcasting. What is it like to write for the ear, and how do you write beyond the ear, even when you're thinking about sounds? We'll get into questions of accessibility as well on that stream. Then we have a two-parter, writing and the senses, and the five senses, really. We'll talk about food for the first one, and then drinks for the second one. And I'm going to draw on my past experience as a reviewer who would review like restaurants and entertainment sort of spaces when I was a journalist. And then one of my passions recently has been thinking about taste and the senses in relation to drinks, specifically beer, alcoholic beer, things like that, of course. And there's a whole industry that foregrounds the senses, and brewing is one of those. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. It's a little preview for an upcoming class I'm working on, writing for web platforms, and then open writing workshop and hangout. So you usually like to do that near the end of the term. Okay, so that's what we got so far. Just lastly, I want to mention that in addition to all of these sort of things that are coming up, just a quick reminder that you can always sign up for one-on-one sessions with the Writing Center at any time. So we have all kinds of different appointments. If you click on here, you'll see we have live appointments and online paper submissions. You can do them a variety of ways, whatever fits your needs. Make sure you use that resource. It's a fantastic resource because we have so many experienced writers who are working one-on-one with you to help you throughout your process, whether it's initial ideation to decoding assignment to finally doing some line editing at the end as you're getting ready for a submission. Okay, fantastic. So today's stream, as I mentioned, writing for publication. That means we're going to focus on preparing your writing for journals, book publishers, and even online spaces. So where do you publish? Where do you want to publish? I want you to be thinking about that during the stream. For many of us, writing starts on a notepad. It moves to a Google Doc or Word doc. For me, it's in Scrivener. I use that program all the time when I'm writing. And yeah, just making sure I'm unmuted. I have a paranoia about that. It might move then to a professor or a peer for a workshop, or to the Writing Center instructor that we've talked about in these one-on-one appointments, who gives us feedback, plenty of feedback. In the writing department and many other departments at York, students and professors take this process a step further by submitting our work to journals and various publishing venues. We even start our own and try to build a community that way. So there's so many different ways you can be published, or that you can think about publishing beyond just submitting it to a journal in a very traditional way. So we'll talk about a bit about that. But mainly where we've published and how you might consider placing writing is the topic of today's stream. All right, so we got some gnarly chat here. We're going to mute that just for a minute. Not sure what this is. Might be a little bit of spam. So we'll have to give them a little timeout, which happens every once in a while. Yeah, so we'll see if we can get them off the stream. That's okay. So we may think through this just a little bit more in order to moderate it. Unfortunately, people like to do that sort of stuff. So we'll just take that out real quick. Not a big deal. I've seen a lot worse in the space, so we'll go ahead and do that real quick. It's too bad sometimes when that happens, right? Don't want you don't want that spam. Nobody likes spam. I certainly don't like spam. Okay. I think we got that taken care of. There we go. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me there while we got some bots joining us there on the stream. It happens when you're in the YouTube space. Where was I? So yes, I was talking about publishing in various spaces. There's a lot of different opportunities we have out there in the world to publish, and some of it may be quite informal. It may be something that a community has started, zines and so forth, or it might be something that's entirely international and national. But a lot of us start small. Certainly when I was writing and I was a student, I was writing for my student newspaper. And then I got an occasional article with a community newspaper. I went on to write for a local or widely distributed newspaper. Then later on started moving into regional magazines and then national magazines. So all the writing you're doing for publication, even if you say, oh, it's not going to get that many people looking at it, it's a pretty small press, it's currency for more writing situations, more publications, because people want to see how you've built or shown it. They want to see a track record, really, of your publications. So start small. There's nothing wrong with that. You can aim high, but sometimes just get your feet wet by looking at sort of smaller independent journals. Really helps. So a little bit more about that later. But mainly where we publish and how you might consider placing your writing is the topic of today's stream. Later on, I'm going to talk about through an interview with Dr. Basemi. I'm going to talk about book publishing with him. He was in the industry working as an assistant professor in our department before he started in our department in fall 2022. But for now, I want to give some shout outs to recent publications in our department. And as I do this, feel free to ask any kind of questions, as long as you're not a bot. And we can talk about writing and research. While these streams are topical, as I always say, I want you all to feel like you can ask anything related to writing. It definitely keeps the stream fresh and gets me thinking about future possibilities. All right. So first, before we kind of talk about what faculty have done, right? Which is, again, what we do for our day jobs. A lot of us work on publishing. We have publishing requirements. We love writing. It feeds our soul. What are students doing, especially in our department? And how are they inviting contributors that are not just students, but are inviting submissions on a very even international scale, I would say. So speaking of student work, I want to look at two examples of in-house journals that we have in our department. So the first is asst. Asst, it is a journal of arts and literature, and the publication is established, it's administered and published by students in the professional writing program at York U. So entirely independent. It's it's not part of a class or anything like that. And if you look through, they publish art pieces, submissions. They also publish fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. So they have a whole list of contributors from this past submission and are constantly distributing copies of that through the York U bookstore. And before the pandemic, there were even live readings and so forth that they were hosting. And they're constantly working on new issues. So you can kind of see what their submission windows are like. They have a program that works on what's called submittable, where you can submit right through it. So no need to mail it in or anything like that. Previously unpublished work, it's very common that journals will accept only work that has not been published elsewhere. Just because they want it to be new and fresh and it's exciting for their journal, they would rather not recycle things that have already seen some readership, right? Makes sense. You want to offer something that's exciting for your readers who have been following you for a number of issues. And here's the interesting thing is journals, one thing to pay attention to especially, is that journals have submission requirements. And so I've already clicked on this here. I've got the link in the description below for you of their submission, of their website and so forth, where you can find these submission guidelines. One thing to keep in mind is paying attention to those guidelines is crucial for bettering your chances of getting published. My coffee is still sinking in, by the way. I think that's why I'm tripping over my words just a little bit, but thanks for your patience. So in this case, they're looking for pieces that are under 3,500 words. Very interesting. I mean, some journals will say no more than 10,000, and one or two articles will take up the entire publication. I was surprised. A recent piece I submitted and had published in an English journal, it was basically writing studies and English studies, I should say, let me go up to about 10,000 words. That's the largest I've ever done. Whereas another one, maybe cap it at about 7,000 words. And sometimes when you've written something really, really long, it's hard to cut out a few thousand words. Very, very difficult. And I'd say even more so, it's hard to keep it short sometimes. When you say 3,500 words, you're like, wow, that's not a lot, depending on what you're writing. I know fiction writers that will write 10,000 words in one day. It's amazing. So I imagine like this might be an easily attainable goal for some of you, or it might be pretty difficult. Who knows? They also give you sort of guidelines on art submissions. If the work is accepted, for example, they will let you know. And they also pay, which is amazing. A lot of journals that are on the smaller end do not. They do not have the funds, but luckily we have that lined up for us in the department. And I know that anybody who gets published appreciates even a token for their work. So if you want to hear more about asst, if you go to the description of Get Writ Live and Why You Writ Live we have here on YouTube, you can find an interview on there with some of the recent editors and sort of what their aims are, what they're looking for, how their workflow works and so forth at the journal. And I think that's a great way to understand what you might be getting into when you submit to a journal, is to hear from the editors. And so again, like on this site, I'll have to just pull it up really quickly. It was a special one that we posted. I will just give a little shout out to that because I think it's awesome. Let's go here. They're not all on there. We have so many things we've posted. Yeah, so editing and submitting to asst. We have 66 views. This is about a year ago. We had 3 editors on talking about the publishing process. And it's a short video. It's about 6 minutes. I should actually put that in the description too. I'll put it on the channel for now so that we know where to look. There we go. And that is not spam, I promise you. Okay. So let's go back to that. The other one that we have, which is an online exclusive, whereas asst publishes in print and digital, there's another one called Inventio. And I love it because Inventio is harking back to how ancient rhetoricians would frame invention. And so that was what's one of the main canons of rhetoric. One of the 5 is coming up with ideas or invention. Lots of ways you can think about this, but you know, as their sort of byline reads or subtitle reads, discover writing by students for students. So invention is usually about discovery and reading and engaging with others to come up with ideas. And so this journal was recently rebooted with more submissions coming in. In fact, I'm sorry to say that the deadline recently passed for one of their upcoming windows and reading windows. I think it was on Monday, if I have that right. So they were talking about that. And yeah, our stream just started a little bit later, but I know there'll be another call later on. So feel free to look at that. And what's nice about this is it's for all current undergraduate students, regardless of program, faculty, year, or school. And so once again, they've got fiction, nonfiction, and poetry they're publishing here. And they ask for a couple different things, like your author bio, submission picture, list of sources from the picture, things like that. It's a very well-organized process about how things work, and they're constantly looking for editors, welcoming editors across different departments. Most of these come from English and or professional writing. But if you're interested in working with them, definitely give them a shout out because, again, they just started up again with this. And in fact, also on WRIT Live, you can find another interview. It's called Moving Writing from the Page to the Web. And we speak with some of the editors who were involved in rebooting it last year. So do check that out too. It's really great. Also, those are linked in the description below too. All right. So those are the 2 things that we mainly work on. And there's also Excalibur, which is one I didn't pull up before we started. But Excalibur is the York University's community newspaper. I know they're always looking for contributors, meaning you don't have to work week to week with them. But if you have an idea you want to pitch to them, they have a whole area where you can think about what the pitch list looks like, what you need to submit when you're pitching your own article. If you have beef with something that's been written or just generally happening on campus, you can think about an op-ed, for example. Features, they give you requirements, what those look like, and what you need to propose. If there's a big takeaway for these 3 journals, again, what I recommend is look at what their publication requirements are and what their guidelines are when you're thinking about publishing. So maybe you have an idea of cooking, but you're going to shape that idea towards what they require when you're submitting. So you might want to write a feature, you have a topic, but if you can answer these questions, that's going to really take care a lot of the vetting and thinking that the editors do when they're deciding whether they want to publish your work. Later on, when we talk with Dr. Matt Bucemi, you'll hear how he thinks about editing as sometimes shepherding and mentoring editors or writers into the publication space. And this is what these help take care of. You're starting a relationship with an editor. You've got to cover these assignments and these guidelines as you write about it. Or prepare to write about it, I should say. Okay. So we've been talking for a little bit about some of these publication spaces. If there are more, let me know out there in the student world. I think there probably are, but those are the three that I think are really strong with us, and I will for sure give a shout out to more opportunities should they come up. All right, let's talk a little bit about the faculty perspective. So, as I mentioned, faculty here, especially in the writing department, a number of us are constantly working on research. We're trying to publish a range of ideas that follow through on what we might have been doing in our dissertation years because we're coming straight from PhD school, or we might be starting new projects. I think that instead of telling you all about just something I worked on by myself, I think it'd be very interesting for this stream for you to think about what it's like when faculty work with students on publications. Before I say that, though, I do have a link in the description for you too, or I'll put that later. If you go to our website, you can see all the research we've published recently, and we're constantly updating these with images and so forth so that you can see who's been publishing what in our department. And oftentimes like these just happen quickly and we move on after we publish it, right? And so some of my colleagues have been doing a very good job of reminding us to upload our publications and so forth so that you can find them and read about them. So that's where we have all the links. And again, it's a living sort of web space. We're going to be constantly putting stuff up there. And student productions even too, which is really cool. We have some of those as I linked to asst and our annual symposium and other course projects that have been done by students. We link to all of those. But what I want to tell you about is the process behind publishing an article with two undergraduates at York. And that came out just last month, last month it came out. This article, which I'm going to talk about here on the stream, it was composed by myself. I did most of the writing, as well as Jessica Oliveira da Silva and Anika Rahman. So these two students, they were award winners from the Dean's Award for Research Excellence, which comes out every year. And they were hired by me, and after being vetted by Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, they were hired to do research with me on rhetorical invention in digital spaces. So specifically, we looked at Twitch and how writers work in those spaces and really negotiate the writing processes in public. And so it was awesome. I was really grateful to have both of them on the team. I'm trying to find their picture right now. For some reason, it's just escaping me. Give me 1 second. I'll have to keyword search them. Unless I'm just not in the right spots. I usually am. There she is. Okay. That was 2020. So actually, one of the students came back for a second year, and I was grateful to have her again. It was Jessica da Silva, and she's been on our stream a couple times too. And so yeah, we looked at communities of rhetorical invention, studying the live work of independent creators on Twitch. Jessica was a student, and she's a recent alum in humanities and professional writing. And then Anika Rahman came from communication studies. And once they started working with me that summer, which is common for the DARE program, but very similar to if you might want to work with your faculty during the term, they worked with me for about 12 weeks, and we started going on Twitch and collecting a lot of information about writers who work in public on Twitch. So it was great. But in terms of preparing for publication, we knew that there was a call from Composition Forum about methods for studying writers. What goes into the process of studying how writers compose, anything from business documents to digital tools, right, and digital streams and things like that. And we thought we could make a pretty good argument. So we started building this research plan. And they knew that I was interested in emotion. They knew that I was interested in how writers, and especially game developers, do a lot of writing in public for public service reasons, or to feel their way through a process and problem solve. And what we did is we started in the summer working through a task list and a project timeline. If you're thinking about something for publication, you want to be thinking about how to plan your entire project. You might be planning an outline for one of your classes, but you want to go deeper than that. If you're saying, I want to publish in asst, for example, look at your project timeline and think about, for example, when the journal is accepting submissions, what's the last date? And then you can work your way backwards. And so what I did with them is I came up with a timeline that was kind of, at first it was basically in a horizontal way. So in May, we were going to do orientations and kind of work out these research questions. In June, we wanted to start recruiting authors, doing basic observations, literature searches, and so forth. In July, start getting ready for the proposal for this issue we were lucky enough to get published in and grateful to be published in. And then in August, we were getting everything together. So the poster that they did for the DARE project, the proposal that we later sent to competition forums, editors, and then we wrapped everything up. That really helps for thinking about publication is, again, just mapping out for the next few months, what am I going to do to get this ready? So think on your own as we're talking about this. If I start in, let's say if you start in November, for example, what are you going to do then to start thinking about publication? Maybe you're not doing so much writing at that point. You're just getting everything together in terms of reviewing the journal and maybe reading a couple issues of it, seeing if it's a fit for you. And then in December, for example, you might go and say, okay, now I've got to sort of edit this to be fit for what asst or the other journal is looking for. And that's very common, going back and forth between writing and planning and preparing. So much that goes into it. And hello to Dia, how you doing? No worries at all for being late. Grateful to have you hanging out. Yeah, and just a little shout out to Dia too. She was on the stream last year talking about writing for YorkU's blogs and so forth. And I think Dia, you were in one of the first ones we had, right? I was just kind of thinking like, yeah, we should get you in there. And if you want to hear more about what it's like to write for blogs on YorkU, check out the interview that I did with her about a year ago. It's unbelievable to think that happened a year ago, where we're writing what we're writing and so on and so forth. I think, in fact, that stream, if I remember correctly, was somehow deleted. Not my fault, never my fault. But here it is. And yeah, so we talked about sort of process behind writing for the YU blog and how ideation works and outlining, and very important. A good smaller example of how to prepare things in the background for publishing. So great stuff. Welcome, Dia. So yeah, tasks organizing, big thing when you're getting this ready. Oftentimes we don't just write our work and then submit it the next day. There's a lot of background planning that happens, and Dr. Matt Bucemi will talk a bit about that in our interview in just a little bit. The research, as I mentioned, what went into it, I wanted to mention this too. We did anything from analyzing audience commentary to recruiting and interviewing authors. In fact, the final publication has a case study with a game developer, and we were able to make sense of that whole experience by using and drawing on this game developer as part of the study. Research also, I mentioned, in addition to doing interviews, we were doing screen recordings and things like that, recording things on Zoom. We even did an interview with one of the developers who invited me to interview him on his own channel. And I thought it was a really interesting method that went into it. And then once we were ready to start proposing it, and then once it was accepted, Jessica and Anika did a great job doing videos for the project, because we were talking about what it's like to do research with the faculty. What kind of happens when you're a student getting your hands on all of this sort of stuff on Twitch, when you're learning lingo and so forth. And the videos, we argued, were a good way to digest what the research experience was like for Jessica and Anika. So really cool things. And these ideas for the videos didn't come out till much, much later into the process. We had drafted the initial proposal. We said we want to do videos. We started kind of working them out a bit more fully once we got acceptance for the proposal. All right, so as I said, we submitted here. So this is open access. Feel free to check it out. It's in the list, I believe. The most challenging part, honestly, was just because we were doing a lot of this during the pandemic, trying to meet together and share files, big files, because we were studying what people were doing on Twitch. It's very challenging to put together. And sometimes when you're collaborating in those asynchronous ways and remotely, it could be hard to kind of get momentum because you're meeting on a flat screen and you're trying to figure out times to meet. I think oftentimes if I can meet and work with somebody in real time on a process, the research process goes so much better, like so much more fluid. We can ask questions and so forth. And we had to kind of work through that a little bit as a research team and say, okay, how do we make this flow in different ways? And there's no right answer to it. I think that you just have to have really open, direct communication with your collaborators when you're saying what needs done and how can we move forward with this. And so the research tasks were constantly updated. You'll see that this one that I have here was about like who, task, deadline, and notes. That was really powerful for us as collaborators because we can kind of check and assign each other materials. And even if you're just doing this on your own, outlining like what your task is and when you want to finish those things can be really great as you're preparing something for publication. So one thing I'm going to leave you with before we turn to the interview is, now that we've published this, like I'm always reminded of this, and I asked people about this last year, would love to know what everyone thinks about this. I constantly bring this up because a game developer told me about this last year. It's called Indie Game Dev Death Loops by Derek Yu. And when you're thinking about publication, it's very easy to get in what he calls the loop of restarting and then the loop of polishing. So if you start a project over here and then you learn a lot of different things as you go, it's really easy to circle back to it and then say, I'm going to completely obliterate this article and start over. Believe me, like my book that I'm finishing up, I've retooled it a couple times and I don't regret it. But at the time, it's really defeating when you're like, I got to start all over here. So I would just say, try to resist doing the restart, maybe more than once. You might have to reframe your concept or your theory or your idea, or your argument, right? As your professors ask you. But restarting can be a dangerous game. And then polishing, right? We do revisions and they take a long time. But at some point we have to stop polishing. We have to stop collecting in research. We're not going to find the perfect source. We just have to move on, right? And it's, I should backtrack a little bit saying just to move on. It's very difficult to do. But what I mean by that is you have to give yourself a deadline to move on. Because you can polish forever. You can polish until you think you have the perfect piece. And you wake up the next day and suddenly you've got another idea for polishing. It's not helpful. It's not helpful for your mental health, for your body, for your collaborators, so on and so forth. So again, Derek used death loops, this idea, really important. And the big takeaway is scaling what your needs are, scaling the project. So you could say size of the writing project that we see over here. You could say polish, time for writing, and so forth. Kind of think of those as 3 vectors or 3 points of a triangle for a writing project or some kind of project. And I think that the time you commit to each of those, polishing time, is important to really consider. How much you're going to polish, how long you're going to polish for, what you're going to do. So I love that piece. It's really, really practical and a good reminder that sometimes I need to get out of that loop. Usually peers help me get out of that. Okay, so now I'm going to play this clip from conversation with Matt Bucemi. In the clip, I actually introduce Matt and all that good stuff, so I don't need to do that here. But I'm going to be in the chat as well, so if you have questions, feel free to ask as we go. But I'll go ahead and mute myself on here and then pull up this one. So I've got to turn down our fancy music. We got to be on silent for just a minute. And yeah, real privilege to talk with Dr. Matt Basemi. He's actually teaching during the stream, so that's why we did a pre-recorded interview. And yeah, it was still a good time. We met on Zoom and went from there. So here goes. Okay, and if it's too quiet or anything like that, let me know. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rich Scheibner here for an interview for Get Writ Live. I'm here with Dr. Matt Bucemi. Did I say that right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. And we're going to talk about all things book publishing. So this week's cast is all about writing for publication. That can mean so many different things. It could be writing for news. It could be writing for blogs. It could be writing for books. Matt has a lot of experience in these different areas, and we were delighted to welcome him to the department along with Christopher Morris this academic year. And so we're going to talk a little bit about writing for book publications, especially because Matt has recently worked in that area and he teaches in that. So Matt, welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah. And we'll say a couple words about you. So let's look up this fancy bio we've got on our nice little pages for our faculty, and you can learn more about Matt on here as well. So Dr. Matthew Bucemi is an award-winning editor, writer, and instructor. He's held leadership roles at publishing houses, production studios, creative agencies, and newspapers, and was the founding managing editor at Sutherland House Books. Matt has also taught a wide range of university courses about everything from philosophy, cultural studies, and literary history to kung fu movies and video game theory. And if you've taught a course on kung fu movies and video game theory together, I'm 100% in, Matt. That sounds amazing.
But separately is not so good.
Yeah. I mean, I would go to both, but like if you could make it that niche, that'd be
I'll make
awesome.
it happen.
Yeah. So he holds a PhD in English literature from Cornell University. Research interests include, but aren't limited to, arts and culture, English book publishing, world cinema. I can never pronounce that, but that's largely comics, right, in French.
Yeah, like French, Belgian, European comics tradition.
Right. And then hip hop. So holds a number of awards in teaching, which is great for us. We'd love to hear that sort of stuff here at York and in our department. And is currently teaching the courses Fundamentals of Editing, Books in Bookmaking, and then Book Publishing Practicum, and has that also on the books in the coming term. So again, Matt, welcome. Really excited to talk to you about all these things because you bring a very interesting angle to our department, working in the industry and having teaching skills and things of that sort, of course, but you're really bringing that industry edge to this department. So again, we've been really excited to have you, and I know the students have also been very excited. Let's pull up some of the go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was only going to say that one of the reasons I took this position is because maybe to anticipate one of your questions, I wanted to bring that industry edge to students. Because I was an English major, I was in the humanities, and it can sometimes be a bit mysterious, like what you can do with that degree. You could go and be an English professor or something like that, but the jobs are few and far between, and it's like, what else is out there? What can you do? I feel publishing is just particularly exciting for people, as a possible avenue, but it's like most students wouldn't know how to get started, what it looks like. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do here, is like show them, here's what you do, here's how it works, take away some of the mystery,
Well, one thing I wanted to start by asking you for this, as you were speaking about mysteries, especially, you're like, what kind of lessons or experiences are you teaching students right now in these book publishing courses at York?
I think that one thing that has been surprising for students is my questions about what things will look like after they graduate. And what will they be doing? What will they care about? Where do they want to be? Where do they see themselves? What type of values do they want to see reflected in their job? Like what kind of company do they want to be at? And for a lot of students, it's like, I never thought about this before. I think I want to be an editor, maybe be in publishing. Maybe I want to be a writer. But wait a second, there's going to be a life after I graduate. It just seems like this nebulous future. And so I'm making it a little bit more real for them. It's like, hey, the stuff we're talking about is this is going to have practical purpose to it. Like you're going to have to live a life. You're going to be living somewhere. You're going to be making money somehow. Like, what's it going to be like? And what will you be caring about at that time? Where are you going to put like all your values and energy? So I think that kind of thing has been really instructive.
Excellent. And we're going off script here already, Matt. I'm going to throw you some curveballs.
Go ahead.
Because, when I do these things, everybody, I send them a couple questions we're going to be thinking through. But when you were finishing your first degree, did you know what you wanted to do? I did a little bit, but like I was still very unaware of like what goes into writing a lot of, like, I wanted to be a journalist, and I'm like, okay, how do I get to that point? Doing internships and stuff. But yeah, I was still like pretty lost. How about you?
I was stone cold committed.
Yeah.
I knew exactly what I wanted, which was to be a fancy English professor, like at a top tier university.
Yeah.
I knew what I wanted to do. And so, I tracked myself exactly with that. I was dogged in like hunting it down, making sure I got a PhD at the best place possible and all this kind of thing. I strangely, once I finished it, I realized I didn't want it anymore. It's like, this maybe being English professor isn't exactly for me. I wanted to have a larger like public impact. That's why I went into publishing. And so, it's funny, like I coming out of undergrad, I was so sure. But by the time I finished all my graduate degrees, it was like, wait a second, I don't know anymore. It took me a while to find what it would be.
Right. Yeah. And I think life presents its like pivots and so forth. And I remember for me, once I started working in journalism, I knew what kind of journalism I wanted to do because I was writing enough in one of the spaces or the other. And so started finding like that more like niche path, I guess, and things. And didn't realize I wanted to be a professor until after my master's. So I was like, oh, what's this thing I can teach? Oh yeah, this is awesome. So it kind of came at like, I guess, industry to academia, and then never really like looked back, but still did some freelancing and stuff. But yeah, it is. It's hard to decide too. Like
I think I think that's a good lesson for students that I tried to also teach them, because for me, it was like academia to industry and now back to academia because, I thought that I didn't want it once I kind of got on the market. But then after 10 years in the industry, I realized like, okay, what if I could be in academia from this angle that I would like better? So, life is a long time and a career doesn't have to look one way. I think maybe for my parents' generation or their parents' generation, you get that one position and you stick there. You get tracked when you're in your early 20s and then that's it, right? But for us, and definitely for our students, life could turn you a lot of different ways, and that's not a bad thing. It's exciting,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think your industry experience is going to help them make those connections, and it seems like it already has. So again, congrats to you and to them. So this stream has been, it's pretty broad, right? We said writing for publication. As I said at the top of this, like that could mean a lot of different things. It could mean anything from news to books. We could spend an entire term talking about just what it means to write for books. But in your experience and having worked across these different industries, what do you think separates writing for book publications, or even just books, I guess, from say like news and journalism, which is sort of where my head's always been, more than books?
I think probably the big difference, because I come from like the trade background, right? It's like books that you would buy for $19.99 at Indigo. It's like the mass market stuff, right? And in that case, it's different from journalism because like your relationship to the truth is a bit different. I think that, like, for instance, if someone's doing a memoir and like their family isn't too happy about it, in a journalistic piece, you may talk about how you reached out to the family for comment and like they declined, or they expressed, through a lawyer or a representative that they're not interested or whatever, right? But in a trade book, you don't have that burden. Your burden is to entertain. And if you ever cut away some things, or if you're a bit, well, I'm not going to say loose with the facts, but you don't have the same burden of fact and truth that you would in journalistic work. The first burden of a trade book is to entertain. So if you skip over some things, that's okay. If you don't shine a huge light on something that maybe doesn't work to your advantage in the book, then that's okay too. In journalistic terms, you would say, well, that lacks integrity, or we're not really giving people the full story. But a trade book is more about emotion and making people feel something. So you're going to curate an emotional experience, whereas a journalistic piece is about making someone like learn something, right?
Yeah, writing to inform, right? The public wants to know certain truths and things of that sort. And the trade, from what I'm hearing, is it's a different purpose. So you can do a play-by-play account in journalism that's purely based in fact, and you can do historical fiction, or something like that that's falling like along those lines, but is well researched, but has a different aim. That's very interesting. I haven't thought about it in a while, about that, like, purpose, right? Just the simple purpose to entertain while you're at the airport, right? Or something like that.
Sure. And with an informative edge or with an informative angle, especially if there is something historical or biographical, or you want to get across the important information, but there doesn't need to be the same scare about bias, for instance. Like in a trade book, if the author has a bias or likes something better or makes a certain emphasis, well, maybe that's why you're buying the book. Whereas like in a journalistic story, we wouldn't like that, right? We wouldn't like to see that sense of bias. Maybe it's a fantasy, but there's a hope that there's a neutrality, right, in journalistic writing. Whereas in like a trade book, that's not really the case.
Gotcha. I mean, and again, we're going a little bit off script, but like, I know journalism privileges speed, right, and so forth. But I guess in terms of trade books, in your experience, what's the turnaround for? It's specifically in the trade book sort of market, the turnaround from submission to final release and so forth. Is it? Yeah. What does that look like?
I say that the average is probably a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get a submission and it's like in decent shape draft in the summer of 2022,
mm-hmm.
there's probably a hope that you'll release it fall 2023.
Nice.
Something like
that's
something like
pretty quick.
Yeah, it is. And part of it is, the work on the book will probably only take until December or January 2022, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Because, printing needs like a 5-month lead time.
Mm-hmm.
Or more. So like, let's say you're doing a hardcover book,
mm-hmm.
you got to give it to the printer at least 4 months, maybe 5 before
mm-hmm.
it's like pub date,
Gotcha.
So a huge chunk of that time is just like production.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm going to shut off the screen share because I think actually in the actual stream I can put that stuff in the background, so we might be a little bit better. Okay, so speaking of time, that's something I want to ask you about. I know you were recently a managing editor for Sutherland House Books, which publishes nonfiction. So we're kind of following the through line. When something moves into publication, or it's being considered, I know the managing editor, at least when I've worked for journals, and I currently work for one now, like, he's making those communications. But when I ask you specifically, what role does that editor, that is the managing editor, play in relation to an author working through a publication? So we're moving through the timeline, for example, like they're in that space. What's going on at that point?
So I think one thing is it depends on the house,
mm-hmm.
the publishing house.
Sure.
Like this, the smaller the house, the more hats that someone like a managing editor needs to wear. Because in like a huge house, like let's say Penguin Random House, Canada or something, there might be like an acquiring editor, and then a managing editor, then there's like a production editor. But in an independent house, like Sutherland House Books is, the managing editor does all of that, does everything all at once. So, if I would get something from a potential author, walking them through it, I might say, if I think there's a lot of potential rich in your manuscript submission, like, hey, this is a great proposal, but before I bring it to the press president, I'm going to go through it with you, and I'm going to help you make it even better. Because I believe in the project, and so I'm going to take the time to kind of hold your hand through it a bit. And I want you to answer these questions for me. I want you to do this writing for me. I want to see where your head is at. And then once you've got that to a good point, then I'll take it upstairs. So like from the very beginning, part of the job is to be a bit of an advocate if you believe in a project, and to give the writer a bit of a test. Because if you ask them certain questions, ask them to do a bit of homework, and they can't come back with it or don't want to, then well, that's sort of a sign right there that they're not going to be like a co-collaborator with you, right?
So it is kind of like a mentorship role.
In a way, or like a shepherding, especially because at like an independent house, you do work with a lot of first-time authors, or people maybe have one book,
right?
So they're not always sure, like, how do I best present this? Like, what is it supposed to look like?
Yeah.
And if you really like it, like, hey, this has a lot of potential, you want to take it upstairs, then you'll work with them to make it better.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, at Kairos, a General of Rhetoric, Technology, and Pedagogy that I edit for, we do a lot of that, like developmental sort of work with them before it goes to the larger board, which is, again, like an editorial board of scholars in the field who share interest, in digital rhetoric. And I think that seems like a good way to ensure that nobody is getting their time wasted. Now, maybe the author feels like, oh, wait, I got to do all these changes before it goes upstairs, before they can just tell me yes or no. But from what I'm hearing, and this is the way I think we try to approach it, is we're trying to help you get a positive result rather than being gatekeeping. Like, and don't get me wrong, some of that stuff's going to happen regardless. Like, you're going to try your best to read the room for them. But I find, like, if they're willing to stay with it for just a little longer and go back one more time and do some revisions, at least one more time, their chances of getting published seem to be a lot higher, because we're on the inside. We're, as you said, being the advocate. So yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of some common ground I think we're finding with what it's like to work as a developmental editor, and managing editor kind of seems like it can occupy that space sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's say it's been accepted. You've shepherded somebody through this process, you've mentored them, you've advocated for them, and your peers in, let's say, Sutherland House Books or beyond have accepted it. I kind of want to know this, like, how much writing goes on behind the scenes besides like the publication itself? So yes, there's copy editing, yes, finish the book or something like that. But once it's accepted, like, is there a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we just don't see? And if so, what is it?
So let's, for instance, you get in a book and the author's been working on the new draft for a few months, and you want it to come out fall 2023. So you want to get it in the books. There's like a metadata database. Metadata is like all the things that compose what makes a book individual, like its ISBN, the dimensions, the page count, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And part of that is there's like the Amazon style summary. Like, Rich was just an ordinary professor until one day, that kind of thing, right? Like, you get that kind of like that copy. That has to all happen like almost a year in advance.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, you got to start nailing down the language, and once you get that really good, that usually that summary will morph into the flap copy, if there is a flap, or the back of the book copy. Because so you have to kind of like learn how to condense the book into that really tight 2 paragraphs. Like, here's the premise, second paragraph, here's the hook. The story of Rich is a thrilling, heartbreaking, experience for readers of XYZ, right?
Mm.
And to know how to like really nail that down. That's part of the writing that happens, that kind of copy. And usually that becomes sort of a, I guess you could say, like the super example that then lots of other things will pick from. So when you get a really tight 2 paragraphs down, then maybe like a social media copy, they'll take a sentence from that, or a tweet. Or, you know, the publicity person wants to really sell the book, so they'll take like a little chunk of one of the paragraphs. So that's sort of like, you got to get a really, really nice tight 2 paragraphs, which then people can then kind of cannibalize for their own purposes. And you also use a version of that with some new writing, usually when you're doing like internal sales stuff. Like you have your sales team and they're going to go pitch the book to, you know, the buyers at Indigo or whoever. So you got to give them like a tight 2-3 paragraphs about like, what is this book and why is it so good?
And what's the writer's involvement in those kind of conversations with the copy? Like, for example, is the publishing house sort of drafting it up and saying, what do you think? Or it's your job to come up with this 2 paragraph like pitch that we can then vet. How does it work?
The author does nothing.
Okay. They're not
they're not part of it at all. Because, you know, they're working on the manuscript.
I see.
And, you know, kind of once they're finished with the manuscript and they submit the final thing, once we usually give it to, you know, copy editor and proofreader and all that, and then the author will have final check. But other than that part of touching the manuscript and finishing it, they don't have any other part of the process. At least in all the roles that I've had. That is entirely internal. Everything you write, all the copy, all the social media, all the publicity stuff, all the sales stuff, the author has no involvement whatsoever. It's sort of all then on the shoulders of staff to be, you know, the, again, advocate for the book and to sell it in the best possible way. And I think that's, at least in the trade world, because, you know, authors, they wrote a book and that's great, but they don't know, right, how to best sell it. Or like
you've got phrase.
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
You've got a different like skill set for doing that, and your team does. And it's just something that you've occupied that space and have those relationships with distributors and so forth, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. How is this going to sell? Like, what's going to convince the buyer at Indigo? You know, even stuff like titles. I mean, if an author really, really hates a title, like they don't want to sign off on it. You know, it happens, but often it's like, I'm not super happy with this, but if you say so, I'm going to go with it. Same thing for cover art, all that design stuff. It's like, this isn't quite what I want. And it's like, look, Rich, this is what's going to sell. I'm telling you. 99% of the time, authors will be on board.
Yeah, interesting. I remember an author I interviewed once, he had like a different title written in the manuscript and it was accepted, and then they like kind of was like, well, you should think of it differently because it will sell better that way.
Yeah.
And it was like it's something he wasn't quite happy with, but like they were thinking about audience even more, I think, from like the pick it up kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, like factors, it seems like, that go into persuading just the sale. And like I think especially like in academia, maybe we don't have to like think about that stuff as much, like, or at least I'm not privy to it, like we're writing abstracts and stuff that, you know, get archived and stuff, and that helps people pick up on whether they want to read it or just quickly digest it. And I'd say, like, beyond that, I'm not sure what goes into it, especially when it's for like an open access place, right? Maybe those sort of factors are just a non-issue at some point. It's more about just trying to push it out into the world and go through those channels to circulate the information than to get the sale, right? And things like that. Wow, I hadn't considered that, how much like it's out of my control now. Like, let them do the work. And I think in some way that could be kind of freeing, you know, to go, okay, I've done my job. I know what I'm good at, which is to write the book, and I can let you experts handle this. Like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that anecdote about the author you talked to is exactly, you see, that's what you see in the industry time and time again. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, I'm not that happy about it, but they told me it's going to sell better. All right. And once you use those words, it'll sell better. Most authors are like, all right then.
Yeah. Right. Interesting. How about that? Well, we talked about a number of things so far. I want to ask you, like, before or beyond submitting the work, because again, like we could spend a lot of time about how do you write for publication. It just there's so much to unpack for. But let's just say they've written for publication, they've written to a place, and it's gone beyond submission. We talked through some of that stuff, but I guess to kind of process that, what do you think is the most difficult part of writing for publication for authors once they're like in the game, like the doors have been opened for them, they're with you now? And again, feel free to draw on your example from Sutherland, but you can speak just more generally about what your assessment is, given what your experience has been.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is wrapping their head around that sales aspect, because you're the seed of an idea. The book originates with you. You wrote the manuscript, you wrote the proposal, all this kind of stuff, and you feel this sense of it's very personal experience to write a book, right? To write anything.
Yeah.
But of course, to write a book that is going to be released, and you feel like the sense of ownership, and there's like this creative genesis, kind of thing happening, and it feels very touchy-feely. So to be confronted by the business side of it can feel a little bit disorienting, I think, for some authors. It's like, some of them could be quite savvy. And this also depends on the publishing house. Some places are like a nonprofit that doesn't care, right? But most publishing houses, even small ones, they're in the business of making money, at least some amount of money. So for authors to kind of wrap their heads around that, the sales aspect, can be difficult at first. Because this is my idea. This is all about just creativity and the life of the mind, man. So getting used to the idea, okay, if I tailor it this way, that's going to open up the audience. If I take this out, that's going to make the book more marketable. That could be an uncomfortable conversation at first, but I think that most authors come around because they want the book to do well themselves, right? They want it to be successful.
And the reality is the book has to get out in the world somehow, and it has to make money for the venue publishing it, right? And
That's
so
right.
it feels like you're maybe betraying yourself when you're like, oh, I'm doing it for the sales, man. It was like, well, you are, but it sounds like what you're trying to get them to is a space of keeping their like artistic integrity while also helping and supporting the mission of the publishing house. Do I have that right? Like it's that towing that line, right. I guess, or
that's right. And like an exercise that I've had people do when they submit me a proposal that I like is I go back to them and I say, all right, look, I want you to write a small series of like reader profiles. Like who is going to buy and read your book? Most importantly, buy your book, okay? So it's like, you might have seen something like this before in like marketing stuff, but it's like, Rich is 33 years old, lives in Toronto. He's a teacher, and he wants to buy my book because he cares about XYZ. This book appeals to him because of XYZ thing. He goes to this kind of podcast, he reads this magazine, and he wants to be informed about these issues. That's why my book will going to resonate with him, right? So if you can write a profile like that for someone, it starts to make it more real that there are people out there that will actually have to purchase this book. And it shows you that when I write, I'm not just writing for myself, but there's an audience that's going to be receiving it and paying money for the pleasure of getting my book, right? So if I want that to happen, if I want to connect my book with Rich, if I want him to buy it, because he's the audience, well, what do I need to do to make sure my book lands in his hands and we make that sale, right? And from the sale, he reads it, which is the most important thing to me as the author. So I think that doing an exercise like that has always been good for authors to kind of get into the sales mindset while still thinking of this as a creative endeavor.
What do you think would happen if authors did that first before even a submission, or even just conceptualizing the entire book? I've not heard of that approach, but I kind of wonder. I'm just speculating. I wonder what would happen. What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. When I've seen proposals that are already doing that kind of work, it gets my attention because it shows me that from the beginning of the project, they've had this in mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, as an editor, you are a business person as well. So it's about, how do I make the best book possible while selling as much as possible?
Mm-hmm.
So if an author can show they've already baked that into their idea,
Mm-hmm.
like it's very attractive. And I've, made offers on manuscripts that I didn't think were that great, but they did that work from the very start without me asking, and showed that they were insightful about what the market is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, okay, there's a good chance here that this could do well, even if I'm not in love with the project. So what it would mean, in a larger philosophical sense for the artistic integrity of the form of the novel, or what, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But just for the sake of trade books themselves, like if you want to get published in a practical terms, thinking of that from the very beginning is like going to increase your chances.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had to grapple with that a lot working on my current project. Is they ask for a proposal and then a sample chapter, and I know some places you just send the whole manuscript out and like an agent will shop it for you. But that's very difficult for me at first to work through like that. I think these audiences really enjoy this, and here are some of like the competitor books and so forth. And I'm like, competitor, like, oh man, like you're asking me to kind of frame them as a competitor. I'm like,
so
I get it, you are.
I just say comparable
books. Okay, that's a good way to think
comparable
about
titles. That's what I think of it, right? It's like, here's a comparable book. It's similar in this way, and I'm going to differentiate myself in this other way, right?
Yeah, it's like writing a lit review, kind of, something like that. Comparable works. I've seen some places that have said that too in academia, and I haven't thought about it in like a trade book context, which you've been referring to. Brings me to another point I want to talk to you about is when I've written for academic journals, and as I mentioned, the book project I'm working on right now, I usually write to the publication, and so I'm like, okay, this is, if I'm doing it for college English or another place, I'm going through their house style, all that sort of stuff, following their kind of guidelines. Do I need a proposal or do I not need one? Things like that. Like, but I just generally, I want to ask you, like, how does that figure into book publishing outside of academia, which is the only space I've been in for that book publishing venue? But just generally, do you see people kind of writing to the particular house, for example, or something like that?
I would say so, because most houses have a mandate, and it's usually pretty explicit on their website. It's like, here's what we do, right?
Yeah, right.
Maybe it's that we do good nonfiction. Maybe it's that we do literary fiction. So there are times, let's say like at Sutherland House, which was a nonfiction house, you would get like a fiction submission that's like, why are you sending this to me? Right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure people at the very least do their basic homework, and having some kind of gesture towards, here's why I think this fits with your list, is attractive. And what I would say to people also, is if anybody is listening to this who just wants some practical advice about submitting a proposal to like a trade house, follow the guidelines, definitely, and don't be afraid to email somebody. People think, oh, I'm going to bother someone. Like, just throw it out there. Like, there's usually an acquiring editor or managing editor email somewhere on the submissions page, or at least in the contact list. It's like, hey, look, I'm submitting something. I have a question. Here's what I want to know about. I want to make sure I'm doing this right. And, there are times when people have done that for me instead of going through the automated process. I'm like, you know what, just send me the thing directly. Like, I'll look at it, right? So, it's an industry where like boldness is rewarded in that sense. Like, don't be shy.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing I want to kind of leave us toward now at this is outreach, advocating for yourself. I find for students and even the working writer, it is very difficult to do, like that emotional moment to like talk about yourself, brag about what you're interested in, start making those connections. So you think there's nothing wrong with making an inquiry, almost like a pre-prop, so to say, pre-proposal, where, I'm thinking about this idea, like I've got this manuscript that's pretty much, I think is like in pretty good shape. I just want to know if you think this might be interesting to the book publisher, because I think a lot of people, and maybe this is just purely anecdotal, think that they can't do that, that's actually like a no-no to say, hey, editor, like I'm interested. I'll say from my experience, like it hasn't been that way. Like people are pretty open when you just say, I'm not trying to like win your favor. Maybe I am a little bit, but like I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste my time is what I'm actually saying to them.
I think that that's right. I mean, I can speak only for myself, really. Or I mean, I know many other editors who will feel the same as me, but let's say I'll speak for myself just right now, just to, just to be clear, is that I have no problem with that. And if someone reaches out to me, like, if the idea is good, like Rich, if you come to me with a great, just, hey, look, here's what I'm thinking. I will say, hey, cool, let's jump on a Zoom later in the week. Let's talk. And I've had that happen, and then something good comes out of it. And maybe nothing comes out of it. That's okay. But as an editor, you're hungry for like something new, something fresh, new ideas. So if someone comes up with it, you're not going to care where it came from. Maybe it was your Twitter DMs. Maybe it was your email, like people want to hear from you. I think that's what writers may not realize, that's the job of editors. I mean, at the bigger houses, they're probably flooded. So, it's not that they don't want to hear from you. It's probably that they don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
But at a smaller house, I say go for it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I hope that's a takeaway. And it is individuated, like in terms of editors, how they sort of feel about that stuff. But I think I'm with you. It's just, I would rather vet with you and put you in the right direction, or just say, like this might not be the best. Like you might want to look at this journal or something before you dive too deep. But like if there's just a micro interest, like just topically, yes, this sounds interesting. If you want to talk further, that's fine. I found that immensely helpful working on the current book and for the publishing venue I'm with right now. Working with like it just, I had some cobbled ideas and they were like, can we see a manuscript in the next few months? So, yes, absolutely. So I felt like they were kind of an advocate for me very early on.
Yeah, I mean, if I could leave people with something as an extension of this, it's, trade publishing is relationships. It's really handshake driven. So, if you send that email and you get a negative response, don't beat yourself up. If people are like, hey, why are you even emailing me, man? I don't want to hear from you. It's like, would you have wanted to work with that editor anyway? Right? It's like when I've, been able to have these times when someone reaches out to me and I get back to them saying, yeah, let's talk. And then it goes really well. They're always like, oh my God, we're so simpatico. It's like, yeah, this is great,
Yeah.
So, like if you're able to form a good relationship with somebody, then that's kind of like the way that publishing works. I like you, our ideas are in sync. Let's work together. So if you get a negative response, then would you have wanted to kind of be at that house anyway?
Yeah, exactly. You will be working with these people for more than a year, just like our classes. And so you need to like be open with them and decide if this is for you, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so Matt, so we can find you on campus teaching these book publishing courses. Anywhere else we can find you on the interwebs or things like that? You mentioned Twitter. Are you on Twitter or?
No, I'm not on anything.
I'm really. Like a ghost basically on there, but
yeah, I have nothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just not for me anymore.
Yeah. Well, folks, you could always find Matt in our halls when he's not teaching or in our lab. And so feel free to reach out to him anytime you see him around the halls. Yeah, it's you bring a great energy to the department. So real pleasure talking with you as part of this series, and hope to hear from you again as you develop more awesome things for your classes.
All right. Thank you so much, Rich.
Okay. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Alrighty, Rue. Let's get back to the webcam. Let's start it back on. Why not? Yep. Hey, here I am. All right. And music, we need that. We always need that music to round things out. What a great interview. I'm, once again, grateful to Dr. Matt Basemi for chatting with us as part of this series. Really grateful for that, for him and his time. So if I could give him a round of applause or ask everyone to, I would. But yeah, a lot of big takeaways. And so what I'm going to do just to leave us is try to process all of this and say, what can we do with things that he mentioned? What might we do with it? And so I'll just start this little doc because, you know, I love docs. I am a big fan of making like little tables and stuff like that. How could we make use of what Matt was saying about publishing? So here's a little exercise I'll leave us with, and feel free to ride along if you want to on the stream, because this is also helpful for me while I start planning, or if I wanted to do this kind of plan, it would work. See if I can pin this to the top. Does that work? No, it doesn't. Darn. That's okay. All right. So what's coming up soon, kind of making sense of this, is there's this thing across the world called Nanowrimo. And I'll probably talk about this a couple times during the stream for the season, because I think, you know, it's helpful. Like next week, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, of writing under different pressures and so forth. But if we started a plan and we tried to make use of what Matt told us, this is what we might do from it. Nanowrimo is an event in which you try to write at least a novella, finish some kind of novel during the month of November. So it's called National Novel Writing Month, is what it sort of spells out to. It's a nonprofit that supports you. There's all kinds of resources you can see from this, communities that help put this together. And, you know, it's a really, really cool thing, I think, by the community. They are just trying to say, like, you shouldn't be alone in this writing process. You should feel like you could do this with a group. And even if it's just entirely online, you know, look how many novelists they have working here. This whole idea has a lot of import, I think, for any kind of publication you're working on. Like, let's just say November is the month you're going to try to finish an article before you even start thinking about where you're going to put it, right? What are you going to do with it? So in November, we might say, like, if we call this like writing for publication, we could give this a topic, and we could say the project I'm working on. And let's just say for me, this is a journal article. For you, it could be your novel. And then from there, you'll say project timeline for preparing for publication. And from that point, we could start working through this a little more deeply. We could say, okay, for November 1st through the 30th, I am going to, we could even dial this down a little more discreetly. Let me pull up my insane calendar and look at this. So we could say November 1st through the 5th, or like say October 31st if we want to cheat a little bit, because October 31st through November 5th, which is Monday through Friday, I am going to produce, let's say this is like a shorter essay, I would like to produce 2,000 words. And then next 3 weeks, 2,000 words each week. So that is, you know, from my experience at least, that's typical for publication tracks. Like you might, I need to move this over just a little bit so we can flip the two and check it out that way. Yeah, so we might say like 8,000 words total. I might say my goal is produce, draft 8,000 words, an 8,000 word article by end of November, in solidarity with, Rimo. So we're going to say that, and then let's say we do, like roughly that much. Now this is scalable. So like we mentioned asst, right? They have a requirement of 3,500 words. So does Invencio. Like you could dial this down and say, okay, I'm going to do 1,000 words a week. So let's say we just draft for November, right? So November, I would have this. And then what's going to be my goal in December? There's a lot of things I can keep in mind. Let's say I've got this. Now, if I'm thinking about publication, right? Yes, I have in my mind that eventually I want to start drafting this for public, like I want to publish this somewhere. But get the words down, do the planning, and then spend December. Let's say we'll do for 1 week revisions. Then week 2, we could say we will let me just pop this up a little bit on the screen so you can see. We'll say begin looking at journals to send this to. Now, if I am tooting the department's own horn, I would say, yeah, look at these 2 journals. You could think about that, or you could look at other undergraduate journals. You can look at, if you're a graduate student watching this, maybe you have some journals in the field in mind. There's so many different options out there. And when you look at these, what you want to do is look at their publication requirements, house style, guidelines, etc. What are they asking for? What are they not looking for? What are they asking for? And what are they, let's do that, looking for? And take notes and such. You might even call or email the editor and explain briefly your idea. This is pitching to them. Start that relationship, as Dr. Bucemi said. Week 3, let's say just before like many holidays for us take off, you will revise your draft further, keeping the journal's ideas in mind. And you could say week 3 and week 4, right? And you might even carry that into January. So let's make that the plan. So you might just spend, after break, let's say weeks 2 and 3, finalize revisions and prepare manuscripts or article for submission. And then, unfortunately, what you do after this, let's say like you submit it in Feb, I cannot spell as I go, you're going to wait for decisions and start the process over. Now, that is incredibly quick, but I mean, just think about, as we heard about with Derek Yu's ideas of death loops, and even Matthew's ideas, like you can flex this out in different ways. Just kind of stretch it out. You might say, I'm only going to do 500 words a week, or I'm going to do like 250 words if I'm even lucky. And so this might take place over 6 months, and that's fine. You're writing toward and for publication, so this is only the beginning. The big ideas you're getting out there, and then as Matt told us, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, all the writing that goes behind it. You might have to write abstract. We saw with Inventio, there's a bio that you have to submit. Lots of different things that go out there. So I hope this is helpful, but I really take put a lot of stock into sort of planning beyond what I've already written. Sometimes I'll say, okay, I've already written the thing. Now what do I do with it? What do I do with it? Lots of different options there. Okay, so that's all I really have for this week. This has been a real joy, as always, to jump on the stream and blab on, especially talking with folks. So if you have ideas in the future of what you'd like to see here on the stream, feel free to write us privately, or you can find me on our York pages, and let me know what you're thinking about. We have a lot of new things coming up that are in store for the stream and beyond, so we can look forward to that. But just as a reminder, this is through the Writing Center for the Writing Department. Again, if you want to make those appointments, feel free to. We have a lot of different options, from drop-ins to one-on-one appointments to those that focus on accessibility. And then for the upcoming stream for next week, we'll be talking about writing under pressure. And then we moved to talking about writing as podcasting. So as always, I'm really excited to do these. You know, I'm thinking about craft all the time, and I hope you are too. And I think even though these streams are an hour and a half, there might be just a moment that you glean from this that's you can apply to your projects. We just got through reading week. We're moving in now quickly, before we know it, we'll have our finals due. So kind of think about how these ideas will shape what you do across your classes. Okay, thanks so much everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.